Get ready to hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the United States healthcare system. With your host of the Medical Truth Podcast, James Egidio.
Hi, I'm James Egidio, your host of the Medical Truth Podcast, the podcast that tells the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the U.S. healthcare system. Just to put out a disclaimer before we get started, I'd like to make this a disclaimer. This podcast and its associated content, websites, articles, videos, only provides general information and discussions about health and medical related subjects and topics. The information and other content provided in this podcast, blog, and website, or in any linked materials are not intended and should not be considered or used as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please consult with your personal physician. Now that we got that out of the way, historically, done for religious or cultural reasons, fasting has now become a popular way to lose weight because you don't have to change what you eat just when you eat. Or do you? My guest is an expert on intermittent fasting and has authored several books on the subject. Her latest book is a New York Times bestseller called Fast, Feast, Repeat. It has a 4.6 out of 5-star rating, which translates to an 80% 5-star rating based on over 13,000 reviews. It is my pleasure, an honor, and a blessing to have on the Medical Truth Podcast, Miss Jen Stevens. Hi, Jen.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love to talk about intermittent fasting and the way it will just change your life, like it changed mine and the lives of thousands of people, millions probably, who are doing it.
Yeah. You probably want to correct me too, because I had mentioned that was your latest book, but go ahead and share with me.
It's my most popular book, Fast, Feast, Repeat. Came out in 2020, right. And it was a New York Times bestseller, which was very exciting. And my most recent book was called Cleanish. It came out in January of 2022. And Cleanish is not an intermittent fasting book, but it's like the next step. You know how you mentioned in the intro that with intermittent fasting, you change when you eat, not what you eat. But often people find they start to feel so good, they want to clean up other areas of their life as well. And Cleanish is eat mostly clean, live mainly clean, and unlock your body's natural ability to self-clean. Intermittent fasting is one of those ways that we self-clean. But, we often find that as we go down this healing journey that intermittent fasting takes us on, we start losing weight, we feel so much better, then we start wanting to naturally eat differently than we never thought we would want to do that, because we realize how much better we feel when we choose different foods than we might have used to had.
So tell the listeners and viewers of the Medical Truth Podcast a little bit about what intermittent fasting is. What are the types of intermittent fasting, and how does it work?
Okay. Let me first give a little backstory about me, just really quick. I am 53, and I have been living an intermittent fasting lifestyle since 2014. You were recording this in 2023, so you can see I've been living it for quite a while. And when I started intermittent fasting in 2014, I was obese. I weighed 210 pounds, and I know it. I really, it's been so long now that it almost feels like, who was that girl? Even though obviously it was me, but I lost over 80 pounds with intermittent fasting, and I have maintained it ever since. Even as I've gone through menopause, as I said, I'm now 53, and I think healthier now, as I, enter my 50s and look forward to many more decades of life. I'm healthier now than I was in my 30s when I was on that diet yo-yo that probably so many of your viewers and listeners can relate to. Because I was always, on a diet, and I was always trying to find the next best thing. And I was always either gaining weight rapidly or losing weight rapidly, but I was never maintaining until intermittent fasting. So, we said intermittent fasting is about when you eat, and it's not a diet. Sometimes people will say, oh, the intermittent fasting diet, and that's not true. A diet refers to what you eat. We all have a diet, your standard American diet. Maybe you follow the Mediterranean diet, maybe whatever, however you eat is your diet, whatever that is. But intermittent fasting is not about what, that's up to you. Intermittent fasting is about when. And, there are several ways you can do intermittent fasting. Most of us who live an intermittent fasting lifestyle follow something that's also known as time restricted eating. And that actually sounds more gentle than fasting. Fasting sounds so hard. And, you mentioned the religious roots of fasting. It's definitely not a fad. Fasting is not something that's new, because for all of time, all religions have fasting as part of them. But with time restricted eating, which is a type of intermittent fasting, you restrict all of your eating for the day into what we call an eating window. And it's just as simple as that. You're either fasting if you're in the fasting part of your day, or your eating window is open and you are free to eat. And then you close your window and start your next fast. And it's just really such an easy way to live your life.
I see. And what are the types of intermittent fasting? Because you hear about different types of intermittent fasting.
Well, we got time restricted eating, like I said, and there's so many ways you can structure that eating window. You may have heard of 16-8. That's one that's gotten a lot of popularity. Mm-hmm. Although I hate to tell you this, and I talk about this in Fast, Feast, Repeat, when 16-8 first gained real popularity, it was a book called The 8-Hour Diet that came out, I don't know, maybe it was like 2012. I'm not 2012. Yeah, 2012. I think it was 2012. Mm-hmm. The 8-Hour Diet, I was, obviously that was prior to when I was a successful intermittent faster, but I remember reading it, and the claims of that book were you could eat whatever you want in an 8-hour period of time, and you would effortlessly lose the weight as long as you stuck to that 8-hour eating window. I'm like, sign me up. Well, guess what? I gained weight. I can't eat whatever I want within an 8-hour period of time. So if I were going to do 16-8, I would also have to diet within my 8-hour window. And I have no desire to ever diet again, meaning consciously restrict what I eat. I prefer to eat until I'm satisfied in an eating window that works for me. So for me, a 5-hour eating window is pretty much, standard, what feels good to me from day to day. I don't always have a 5-hour eating window. Some days it might be 6 or 7, depending on my schedule. Other days, maybe only 2, because I was really busy that day and I didn't have time to eat till dinner. And I just had a really nice dinner and then a little something to close my window later. So all of those are just different ways to structure time restricted eating. It's a very flexible way to live, and it doesn't have to be the same from day to day. And then we also have alternate daily fasting protocols, and people may have heard of 5-2. That was one that was really popular, probably right around the same time, 2012-ish. A lot of people were talking about 5-2. It came out of alternate daily fasting research done by Dr. Krista Veraday here in the United States, but Dr. Michael Mosley in the UK, he's a doctor that does a lot of different things on television. We have TV doctors here in the United States as well.
Right.
And he had read about alternate daily fasting, and he said, what if I just do it 2 days a week? So he started doing it 2 days a week were his fasting days. And actually in those days, it was eating 500 calories on the fasting days. And then the other 5 days were just normal eating days. So all of the alternate daily fasting protocols have their roots in, you have down days and you have up days. So your down days are your fasting days, then your up days are eat normally days. And that's a lot more complicated than a daily eating window approach. And for anyone who, has dabbled in 5-2 or 4-3 or alternate daily fasting, I have a lot more information about that in Fast, Feast, Repeat. It's really a more complicated or advanced type fasting. And I encourage everyone who's interested in starting out to start off with the daily eating window approach or time restricted eating. You're kind of building up your fasting muscle before you venture off into other forms, because what we want to avoid is over fasting. And, like everything can be taken to the extreme. Fasting is one of those things. There are people who are like, oh, if fasting is good, then fasting for 21 days straight must be even better. And that's not true. There comes a period of time when you're doing too much. And so we want to make sure that we're building a safe fasting protocol that's based on research, time tested, and it's going to do good things for your body rather than being too much.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you mean by 5-2? What clarify that a little bit.
Okay.
I'm a little
Well, we got 7 days a week. And
right.
so the 5-2 that Michael Mosley popularized, 5 days of eating normally. And then there were the 2 days that were the fasting days.
Oh,
So you
okay.
have 2 days of fasting protocol and then 5 days where you're eating normally. And that sounds really attractive to a lot of people, but it actually can be a lot harder than just sticking to time restricted eating day by day,
Right.
because with time restricted eating and sticking to a schedule that's more consistent day to day, like a 5-hour eating window, for example, your body becomes metabolically flexible and you're fat adapted. And so you are able to have your daily fasting time sail right by and you feel great. And then you open your eating window. Whereas with 5-2, the 5 days are just normal days. And then on the 2 days that you're fasting, you're just not quite as metabolically flexible with only having 2 fasting days per week, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Does that mean those 2 days you don't eat anything at all?
Well, the original research on alternate daily fasting, they had people eating 500 calories a day. It was more like fasting mimicking, because you're obviously, if you're eating 500 calories, that's not a full fast. So you can choose to have a 500 calorie down day, which is what the original research was based on, or you can do a full fast for, like, let's say 36 hours. For me, it was actually easier to, I've tried all the different fasting protocols. It was easier to fast for 36 hours than it was to have a 500 calorie meal and then fast some more, because 500 calories is just like opens the floodgates for me and I want to eat more.
Yeah. How does intermittent fasting work in addition to good nutrition? Because it sounds like when you say, okay, I'm going to adopt this intermittent fasting protocol, that I could pretty much eat what I normally eat or whatever I want to eat. But how does it work? Let's say if I adopt intermittent fasting and change my dietary intake of the foods that I eat.
I actually, in Fast Feast Repeat, I have something called the 28-day fast start. And in the 28-day fast start, you're building up your metabolic flexibility. You're learning how your body's learning to be fat adapted. You're building up your fasting muscle. And during the first 28 days, I do not want you to radically also change what you're eating. You know how people will get really excited and they're like, I'm going to get healthier. I'm going to start intermittent fasting. I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off. I'm going to have a 3-hour eating window every day because that sounds even better. And I'm
doesn't that happen on January 2nd?
Every year, right? And they're like, and I'm going to clean up my eating. I'm going to eat clean, fast. I'm going to have a 3-hour eating window. Yes. And so you start doing all of that, and then you can't. It's too much at once. So if you try to change too many things at once, you're a lot more likely to crash and burn. And we've all been there. We've all done it. So, I really suggest that when people are starting intermittent fasting, whatever you were doing before you started, keep doing that. And that goes both ways. If you were already eating pretty healthy, I don't want you to start intermittent fasting and bring back all the junk, right? If you were doing keto and you've been doing keto for 5 years, and I don't want you to start intermittent fasting and also bring back all the carbs at the same time.
Right.
If you were eating the standard American diet, I don't want you to start intermittent fasting and radically change what you're eating and be a perfect clean eater on day one, because that's just too much to change at once. Keep doing what you were doing with food. Your only goal when you're starting is to nail the clean fast, which we can talk about in a minute. What do I mean by clean fast? You nail the clean fast, you're building up your fasting muscle. And in the 28-day fast start chapter, there are different plans you can choose from where you're kind of ramping it up slowly versus, starting off a little more aggressively. But you can always scale back if you need to. I kind of liken it to couch to 5K, which we've all heard of. If you wanted to run a 5K, but you've been very sedentary, you're not going to get up off the couch on day one and run a 5K. You don't have you just can't do it. You're not in good shape. Fasting is like that. You've got, on couch to 5K, they get up, they walk a little bit, and then maybe run a tiny bit, and they walk some more. When you're building up your fasting muscle, it's the same thing. So when it comes to food, because I know I didn't really answer your question about food.
No, that's
we
okay.
find that something strange happens. It's really not strange at all, but when you understand why. But when we start, we may be eating one way. I started as a very standard American diet eater, meaning I had done so many diets that I was just sick of trying to restrict what I was eating. And I never found success in losing weight by focusing on the what. No matter really where I was trying, keto or Whole30 or Dukan diet, or literally name any diet, you could fill it in. When I just focused on changing what, that never really led to long-term weight loss for me. So I was so tired of that. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to do intermittent fasting. I'm going to continue to eat whatever I want. And that's what I did. And I found that I lost weight at about a pound per week. But as time went on, I started to make more connections with how I felt and what I was eating. And so naturally, I started to gravitate towards, quote, healthier foods, real foods, because I realized I felt better when I ate that way. And as I hinted at before, we find that happens to almost everybody that lives an intermittent fasting lifestyle. They start to realize really how foods make them feel. And we feel so good when we're fat adapted and fasting, and then we open our window. If you eat something that doesn't work well for your body, like let's say, for example, I used to love Doritos. I still like the taste of them, but let's say I went and got a bag of Doritos and opened my eating window with a bag of Doritos, I would feel like crap.
Right.
That would not nourish my body well. I would feel awful. I would probably have a blood sugar spike, and then I would crash. Then I would feel hangry, and I would just feel ugh. So I don't want to feel like that. And so I've made the connection with what works really well for me. So one of the things I've been enjoying lately to open my window, I'm making homemade pita bread using whole wheat flour. I know what's in it. Doesn't have any funky additives. And I top it with some homemade hummus. And I can put in whatever I like, the flavor it up, roasted red peppers or olives or anything. And then I put a little organic sauerkraut on the top, a lot of good probiotics in that organic sauerkraut. And I eat that and it nourishes my body and I feel amazing. I don't have the crash and I don't feel like crap. And if you would have told me in 2014, when I started intermittent fasting, that I would rather have organic sauerkraut on top of homemade pita bread than Doritos, I would have been like, you're lying.
Yeah.
But I eat completely differently now than I used to, but not because somebody told me I needed to. My body has directed me to this. We went out to dinner last night. I got the vegetable plate and it was amazing. Sauteed spinach and Brussels sprouts and mushrooms and yum. It was so good.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the benefits of intermittent fasting?
Well, there's so many benefits, and it's all interconnected, and it has to do with why we're really so sick right now. If you think about it, if you look around society, we know that type 2 diabetes is on the rise. Everyone seems to have some sort of metabolic issue or metabolic syndrome. People have a lot of autoimmune diseases, and all of those things are connected to our unhealthy eating habits. Really, they're lifestyle diseases, right? And we're eating the wrong foods because all the foods that are surrounding us are so ultra processed, but we're also eating all day long because we've been told for the past few decades, you got to eat 6 small meals a day to keep that metabolism going, right? How many times have you heard that?
Yeah.
You start the day, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and you have to eat, within 30 minutes of your feet hitting the floor, and eat often, small meals throughout the day to keep your metabolism going. So we wake up, we have our, healthy breakfast, and then we have our latte, chemically laden all throughout the day. And a little snack here and a little snack there, and then a little lunch. And then we just keep going all the time. And so basically, you're constantly in the fed state and you're on that blood sugar roller coaster all day. I think about before I started fasting, I would have my breakfast, my blood sugar, then it would crash. Then I would have my latte, then my blood sugar would crash. Then I would have my snack, and my blood sugar would crash. So I was constantly feeding myself to keep my blood sugar up because of all the crashing. And there's a little known thing going on in the background that unless you're a diabetic, you don't think about insulin. You don't think about, what's happening with insulin. But every time we eat or drink something like a latte or coffee with a sweetener in it or a diet soda, our brain tastes that sweetness, the food flavors or actual food, whatever we're having, we release insulin.
Right.
And we release insulin because that's what our body does in response to blood sugar going up. And when the body is working well, we have the right amount of insulin. It manages our blood sugar. We feel good. But in this state of constantly feeding ourselves, where you're constantly having another snack, another latte, another diet soda, your insulin levels go up, 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 up all the time because your pancreas is constantly pumping out more. I'm sure you've heard the term insulin resistance, right?
Sure.
And you become insulin resistant, and then your A1C starts to go up, and then you get more insulin resistant, and then eventually it goes down the road to type 2 diabetes for so many people.
Right.
But that comes from the demand for insulin being chronically higher and higher over time. I like to think of insulin resistance. I was a classroom teacher for 28 years. I think of it with an analogy from the classroom of like a teacher who yells, right? We all knew teachers who yelled, and their class eventually just tuned them out.
Right.
And they had to start yelling louder and louder and louder just to get attention. So think about insulin resistance the same way. Your body stops listening because it's got so much insulin, stops listening and stops being able to function. So it has to pump out more and more and more to do the job. Then you have chronic high levels of insulin, also called hyperinsulinemia. And there's a fabulous book out there called Why We Get Sick. It came out, I believe, in 2021. So it came out after Fast, Feast, Repeat. But it's by Dr. Benjamin Bickman. And in it, he does a fabulous job linking hyperinsulinemia or chronic high levels of insulin with so many of the problems of today, whether we're talking about type 2 diabetes, which I touched on, autoimmune diseases, obviously obesity, and just so many other things. Like, if you have high levels of insulin and you're going through menopause, you're going to fare worse. So bringing down our insulin levels is one of the most powerful things that we can do, because cardiovascular disease, all of these things are made worse with the chronic high levels of insulin, and also, chronic high levels of blood sugar that cause so much damage in our bodies. But it just it's a cycle that perpetuates itself. Higher levels of blood sugar, insulin goes up. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
Sure.
And so the thing about fasting is when you're fasting clean, nothing brings down your insulin levels better than fasting. And so we fast clean, which means we stick to black coffee, plain water, sparkling water, no flavors added, because we don't want our brain to think that we're putting in something sweet, because of something called the cephalic phase insulin response. Cephalic referring to the brain. They did a fascinating study with rats where they put sweetness into the rat's mouth and saw what happened. They released insulin just from the taste of the sweetness, even though it was a 0-calorie sweetener, no calories coming in. The cephalic phase insulin response, the brain sensed sweetness and said, oh, we know what sweetness is. Now think about, just from the brain perspective and history of all of Earth, when you tasted sweetness, what were you having? You were having honey or fruit or something that was going to have a sugar load for your body, right?
Right.
And so your brain understands that from all of time up until now, and knows that you're about to have your blood sugar go up. We better go ahead and pump out some insulin to deal with that. Except now it might be a Diet Coke that you're having, and your blood sugar is not going to go up from a Diet Coke because there's no sugar in that Diet Coke, but the brain doesn't understand that artificial sweetener. So they painted the rats' mouths with these sweeteners, or their tongues. Insulin was released. Then they did something even more fascinating. They cut the nerve from the tongue to the brain. So they were still painting the oral cavity of the rat with this sweetness, but the brain couldn't taste it, couldn't perceive it, no insulin response. So that lesson, when I read that, I was like, well, okay, we've got to really be careful about anything we're tasting during the fast. So you don't want to have your flavored fizzy waters. you go to anywhere now, there's like a million flavored waters you can have.
Right.
And they might be 0 calorie. And so you think this is absolutely fine because we've been trained with calories in, calories out, right? If it doesn't have any calories, it's going to help us lose weight. It doesn't affect us at all. But now think about what I said before about insulin, chronic high levels of insulin. Every time you're tasting this strawberry flavored water, your brain thinks, oh, we're getting strawberries. So it's releasing that insulin. And another thing I didn't mention about high levels of insulin before is that insulin it's a fancy word. It's anti-lipolytic, which means it prevents fat burning. When you have chronic high levels of insulin, your body is in storage mode. Insulin is a storage hormone. And if you want to burn fat and you're in storage mode from high levels of insulin, that's not going to work out very well. So when we bring our levels of insulin down with the clean fast, finally, we're able to tap into our fat stores for fuel, just like nature intended. When I was 210 pounds, I was carrying a lot of fuel around on my body that I should have been able to tap into, but I couldn't. So when we're trapped in that cycle of, 6 small meals and always drinking something flavored, we're never letting our body have insulin go down, tap into fat stores, fuel us from our stored fat. So I've just kind of talked around in circles, but I hope that it makes sense.
No, you didn't. You made a lot of sense. In fact, I'm very familiar with that study you were talking about.
Yeah.
Cephalic. Yeah.
Yeah. And people are like, that's not true. I'm like, well, that's what happened. So I'm drinking my unflavored Topo Chico right now. So
yeah, I can't believe. Yeah, I can't believe how many people don't drink water. I mean, it's amazing. And it's
when people will say, I can't drink plain water. I don't like the way it tastes. And I'm like, that is really just a testament to modern society. What do you mean you don't like the way? If you go back thousands of years, people are drinking water out of the creek. I mean, can you think of all the... And now we have fresh, clean water and we don't like it? What?
Yeah, I know. And I drink probably 3 liters a day at least, minimum.
Yeah. And when you retrain your taste buds, I mean, if you've been drinking nothing but flavored water and flavor enhancers and diet sodas and putting a bunch of junk in your coffee, then you're going to have to retrain your taste buds. But once you do, it's amazing.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah, I hear the biggest complaint about people not wanting to drink water is the number one complaint is, I'm always going to pee. I'm peeing too much. I pee too much. Peeing's good for you. If you're drinking water and you're peeing, your body's means your body's flushing itself out.
But the person who's saying that is probably drinking a big gulp Diet Coke all day long. Of course they are. Right.
Yeah,
and that is, that used to be me. So I am not, I don't want anyone to ever think that I am criticizing people because that was me. I would go on the way to school, I would drive through Chick-fil-A and because it was on my way to work and I would get chicken minis. And they had these big styrofoam cups. And if I was dieting, I would get Diet Coke in my big styrofoam cup. And if I was not dieting, I would get regular Coke in my cup. And I would nurse that all day long.
Sure.
And whether it was the Diet Coke or the regular Coke, neither was good for my body.
No.
Now I know that. I wouldn't drink it if you tried to get me to, but...
Yeah. When we used to have patients come into our clinic and they were obese and they'd have diabetes and blood pressure problems, the first question I would ask them is, do you drink soda? And they'd say, oh, yeah. And how much soda do you drink? Oh, I drink maybe 2 or 3, 4 big gulps a day.
Yeah.
And they were like, but I want to lose this weight. And I said, I'll tell you what, just give yourself a 30-day challenge on just quitting soda, right?
Yeah.
And they did, and they'd come back and they had lost like 15 pounds, 10, 15 pounds in 1 month of not drinking any soda at all and substituting it for water. So that first 10 or 15 pounds came like right away.
I really think even if, forget fasting. I mean, I love fasting. I think everyone who is an adult who is not pregnant or breastfeeding should do some intermittent fasting unless you also have like eating disorders. That's a whole different conversation. But I think, even forgetting fasting, if the only thing we did was change the beverages and if people only drank black coffee, and I'm talking about unflavored. Don't get your hazelnut specialty, right? No, black coffee. The bitter flavor profile does not cause our bodies to release an insulin response. We do not release insulin in response to the bitter flavor profile of coffee. So you can stick to plain black coffee, plain tea, and I'm talking about real tea, not all those frou-frou herbal teas that are sweet, and plain water, plain sparkling water, no flavors. If everyone just switched to that, what a difference we would see.
Oh, I agree.
You can go to Starbucks and order a black coffee. It costs a lot less. They hand it right to you. You don't have to wait forever for your drink. And you also feel like a champion with your black coffee. And it's just a very easy change to make once you train your taste buds. But I really think that we would see such a change, because I used to always have either that big soda or a latte in my hand all the time when I was obese.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I drank a soda. It must have been like maybe I'll be 60 in July. So I'm thinking that had to be like when I was 13, and it was probably at a McDonald's or something.
July what? I'm a July birthday.
3rd.
I'm the 23rd. So okay.
The 3rd. So like I said, I drink black coffee because my stepson is the largest distributor of coffee in Rome, Italy. He's got the number one selling brand. I'm kind of plugging it, I guess, on this.
Well, definitely.
Podcast.
Yeah.
But so I know coffee, and I drink good coffee. His coffee is amazing. But I drink it black. I don't even drink it with cream or sugar or anything.
It's better for you.
Yeah, it is. And my wife, she'll put oat milk in her coffee, which is fine. But I just love coffee. It takes the taste away when you start putting anything other than just drinking your coffee black with no sugar or anything, or any cream or anything.
And if you're fasting, if someone is specifically fasting, those tiny little bit of oat milk or a little bit of cream does make a difference. You don't want to put that in because that's food for the body. So keep all that out for the fasting. Black coffee. And the part that's such a challenge is people do not want to give up what they put in their coffee. They're like, I can't drink it black. And then I saw a YouTube video that said it was okay if you put 50 calories of cream in there, it doesn't break the fast. And that always boggles my mind, because what is cream? Cream is dairy. And what is dairy? Dairy is nature's perfect food for the period of time when we are building a mammal baby at its most rapid stage of development.
Right.
I mean, I'm not anti-dairy. I love dairy, but it's not fasting. It's the perfect food for building your body. And so it's going to cause insulin response. It's also food for the body. And so I don't care how many YouTube videos you watch that say cream is okay. It's not fasting.
Yeah. Man, you're making me hungry. I think I'm going to go get a pizza after this.
All right. We're going to have pasta tonight with like a little Thai kind of pasta. It's got
you go.
Vegetables in there and a little peanut sauce and some peanuts in there. I'm really excited.
Jen, let me ask you a question. Which intermittent fasting program or regimen is best for weight loss?
And that question does not have an answer.
Oh, okay.
So you're like, what? Okay. So when people start with the 28-day fast start, one of the things that's the most important is I have them put their scale away for the first 28 days, not weighing at all, because the first 28 days are not for weight loss at all. And then after the first 28 days, they can start weighing and seeing what their weight is doing over time, focusing on the trend only, not the fluctuations. And from there, we call it tweak it till it's easy. And that means you've got to figure out the approach that works well for you. We're not all going to be the same, and it's going to depend on a lot of individual factors. For example, I already mentioned that for me, an 8-hour eating window was way too long, because I am more of a volume eater. I like to eat plenty of food. I don't like to feel restricted. I don't like to diet little bits of food. So I can eat too much food in an 8-hour window. That being said, there could be somebody who naturally eats like a bird, little bit. Maybe an 8-hour window is perfect for them, because if they tried to have a 5-hour window, they wouldn't be able to eat enough. And it just all depends. The beauty of intermittent fasting is you really do figure out what feels good to you. You figure out what time of day is best for you. You figure out how long of a window feels great for you. For me, I like to open my window every day, depending on actually seasonally, when it's winter and gets dark earlier, I tend to open a little earlier, maybe 2 o'clock. As the days start to get longer, I'm more active, I'm out and about. I might not open till 4 that day. And I might stop eating by 7 in the winter, but maybe in the summer, I'm still having a little something at 9. I'm staying up a little later. And so for me, I feel great having that eating window later in the day. There are some people, though, who can't sleep well if they eat too late. I can't sleep well if I eat too early. So that's all the part that makes it individual. The alternate daily fasting protocols are amazing for people if someone is especially insulin resistant, if they have been overweight for decades. Like if someone is listening and they were overweight from the time they were in high school and now they're 50 years old, they're most likely pretty insulin resistant. They may need to do some alternate daily fasting down the road to really get their levels of insulin down farther. The daily time restricted eating might not be enough for their bodies. But I don't want people to think that they're going to have to do that or that they're going to need to, because you won't know till you try. If someone starts off and they're having a 5-hour daily eating window and they're losing weight at a great pace, then that is what they should keep doing. But if they keep going and they're not losing the weight, they can start to experiment with different things. Maybe throw in one down day a week. And then all this is in fast, feast, repeat. The down day would be the day where they do a 36-hour fast, for example, because that's really bringing their insulin down. And, I have a podcast called Intermittent Fasting Stories. And on that podcast, I talk to, intermittent fasters just like me, just normal people who have been doing intermittent fasting. And you'll hear everything, all from people who have a 5-hour window to people who do alternate daily fasting to people who switch it up. And it just really is all about figuring out what your body needs for weight loss. And then that comes down to the food choices as well. Some people find they do need to make changes to what they're eating to see weight loss. Again, someone who's been obese for decades may need to make more changes than someone who is just wants to lose a little bit of weight. They're pretty healthy. They've always been active. They've never been much overweight. They really want to lose 10 pounds. And it's all about what your body needs and, what your body, what's going on inside. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you're not going to be an intermittent faster with losing weight in mind and then replacing that or having that meal at McDonald's, that voracious meal at McDonald's.
Well, I mean, you if someone is,
you probably could, but
you could. I mean, but you're not going to want to do that for long. Again,
No.
I told you that when I started, I was very much eating the standard American diet because I was so diet weary, and I was like, forget it. What I eat doesn't matter. I'm just going to do intermittent fasting. I'm not going to change what I'm eating. And we were still doing a lot of driving through and a lot of microwaving and convenience foods at that point.
Right.
And eventually I didn't like the way those foods made me feel. I started to connect it and I wanted to feel better. And so I changed it naturally. So if someone is starting off with, and they're eating McDonald's, then again, it's better to do intermittent fasting with McDonald's than to eat all day with McDonald's, right?
Right.
Start small.
Yeah. It sounds like your body actually makes these biochemical changes when you do intermittent dieting.
Yes. Yeah. With intermittent fasting, our bodies change a lot. We get more in tune with our hunger and satiety signals. There's a really fascinating study that I talk about in my book, Cleanish, that came out last year. And you could not do it today, but it was like this pediatrician, and she got all these kids that were like, I don't know, they were orphans. I mean, I don't really, it's one of those things you would not do in the modern world, but she had all these kids. It was a feeding study, and she just put all these foods in front of them and said, eat. And they didn't direct them to anything. And it turns out those little kids, the infants, the toddlers, they were fabulous at crafting a very healthy diet over time. Like there was this one kid that they studied that had, I guess, rickets or some sort of deficiency. And that kid fed himself cod liver oil.
Wow.
Until he cured the rickets, and then he never touched cod liver oil again. So the point of that story is, if you think about pregnant women who start craving weird things, maybe the pica or, some of those, is pica the right word for it? When they have those, pica. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Anyway, they
so.
start craving weird things and start eating them when they're pregnant because they have these deficiencies. We know that our bodies are wise. And with the whole modern food landscape, with all the ultra processed food, all the chemicals, all the eating all day long, we've completely lost touch with what our bodies want and what we are really craving. So, I was just someone in my fasting community today just made a post. She said, I've just noticed something really interesting. She's postmenopausal. She said, now that I am on the other side of menopause, I am no longer interested in red meat. But when I was younger, I used to crave red meat, especially certain times of my cycle. And she's like, I really think that my body doesn't, have the same, maybe iron needs that it did. I'm like, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So the point to all of that is when we tune back into our bodies, we get that connection that we used to have that we have lost.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's what's interesting too, a lot of things I hear besides the not drinking water is I hear a lot of sentiment about, well, it's going to cost me too much to eat good. No, it's the opposite.
True. What's the saying? You can either make time for your wellness now or make time for your illness later. The same with the cost. You can either pay for being well or later you're going to pay for the medication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know. I live on, personally, I live on, I'll do a couple protein shakes in the course of the day, and I primarily live on raw, a raw diet, salads with raw vegetables and bean soups, a lot of bean soups.
I love beans.
I make a lot of
They're
lentil
like my
soup.
favorite. Yeah. Lentils. Yeah.
Yeah. And a 16 bean soup. And it's amazing because, when I get to eating it in the evening, very early, and I cut off eating after like 7 o'clock. I don't eat anything after that unless I have like some tea or something. I'll just drink some tea with no honey or anything like that in it. But, the bean soups are amazing because they fill you up and they're so hearty and they're so good, especially those 16 bean soups. They're amazing.
Beans are so good for us. And so people can afford to eat beans, right? And I actually saw a study. It wasn't like a randomized controlled trial kind of study, but it was more of like an epidemiological type thing. And it talked about how when it comes to longevity and health, like beans are the food most linked to being healthy and living, because you look in the societies where people have enough to eat and they're eating beans, but beans are the food that are just linked to better health all around the globe.
Absolutely. And they're loaded with all the essential amino acids with none of the fat. So you got all the protein that you're ever going to need. And I'm a muscular guy. I go to the gym 5 days a week, still work out with weights every day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm going to lose muscle tone and I'm going to do this if I, start that kind of a diet. And I'm like, no, it's the opposite actually, because you're going to shed a lot of the fat.
Yep.
And you're going to be leaner, more muscular is what's going to happen.
And with intermittent fasting, to piggyback on the idea of muscles and muscle loss, there's a misconception out there that if you're fasting, your body's going to burn your muscle up for fuel.
No.
And it's not going to do that if you're fasting clean. Let's think again about what I talked about insulin being high. And okay, if your insulin is really, really high and you can't tap into your fat stores, the body's going to burn whatever it can find. But if you're fasting clean, your insulin is low, suddenly there's all the fat. Is your body so stupid that it would burn valuable muscle tissue, or is it going to use the fat that is right there and easily accessible now?
Use the fat.
It's going to use the fat. We're not going to burn our muscle tissue unless it can't get to the fat. So, if you're doing a typical low calorie diet where you're drinking diet sodas all day long and you're eating all the small meals, your insulin is high, maybe your body can't get to your fat very well. It might actually have to burn a little muscle tissue because it can't get to your fat. But when you're fasting, you are getting into those fat stores like never before. And we also have something going on called autophagy, which is our body's recycling program. So it actually breaks down old junky proteins that we've got hanging around. Any old junky cell parts, it breaks those down and rebuilds things out of them. So you're like recycling your body's own protein while you're fasting.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I totally agree with everything you're saying. And I, you've become the expert on this subject, and your latest book is called Cleanish, right?
Yeah, it is.
So
Cleanish.
I was wrong one. Right. Your New York Times bestseller book was
Fast, Feast,
Fast,
Repeat.
Feast, Repeat. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can be found online at
JenStevens.com, and it's Jen, Gin, Stevens with a PH, JenStevens.com. And we have an intermittent fasting community that you can join. It's at JenStevens.com/community. And I used to have groups on Facebook, and they were free. And we had like 500,000 combined members, and it was just way too much. It was crazy. And, I loved supporting people with their intermittent fasting journey, but it got to the point that all we were doing was managing instead of really, you can imagine how Facebook would be with 500,000 people trying to ask questions. And so I took my community off of Facebook. And so we have more along the lines of 5,000 members, and it's a paid community, but it is such a different kind of a place. And everyone is there, with the goal of supporting each other, and I'm there. And so we're helping each other get through our intermittent fasting journeys. It's such a great community. And for people who want to learn more about, how people can make it into a lifestyle, the Intermittent Fasting Stories podcast, just pick any episode at random and listen. And, I've recorded 293 episodes as of yesterday, and every story has something new in it.
Sure.
How can I listen to 293 different? They're all we see ourselves in every story, but we also learn something in every story. And for anyone who wants to get started, get Fast, Feast, Repeat, and start at the 28-day fast start chapter. Make sure you understand the clean fast, because if you're going to fast, you don't want to waste your time. You want to fast clean. You're either fasting clean or you're not really fasting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, I'll post the links from the Medical Truth podcast, from Jen's website from the Medical Truth website over to Jen's website and her book and everything. So it's all there to be viewed and purchased. And thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Medical Truth podcast, Jen. It's been awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Medical Truth Podcast. For the latest episodes, go to www.medicaltruthpodcast.com. You can also find the Medical Truth Podcast on Rumble, as well as all the major podcast platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeart.